The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's the way people were able to tell time before we had clocks. After the invention of the clock, the most elegant timepieces showed up in the 1600s with the creation of the Longcase Clock. This is All Request History. If you're curious about the history of, well, anything, subscribe here, put your request in the comments, and you could be next on All Request History. This week we look at the history of the grandfather clock. First known as the Longcase Clock, this precision swinging pendulum needed a large area to swing back and forth, so it was housed in a long wooden case. It was invented by English clockmaker William Clement around 1670. The name grandfather clock is said to have originated in the 19th century from the song My Grandfather's Clock by Henry Clay Work.
My grandfather's clock was too large for the shelf, so it stood 90 years on the floor.
Until that song, they were just called Longcase clocks. Another theory is these clocks were highly prized possessions, were often passed down through generations, maybe from the grandfather. They became symbols of status and sophistication in homes across Europe and America. Over the centuries, their designs and mechanisms evolved, but they have remained a timeless and elegant piece of furniture. Question: do grandfather clocks display the number 4 as Roman numeral IV or as 4 eyes? The answer is coming up. Grandfather clocks were built in ornate wooden cases, often crafted with oak, mahogany, or walnut, with intricate carvings and detailed embellishments. The clocks were equipped with weights suspended by chains or cables and driven by a winding mechanism. This is what gave them the familiar tick-tock sound. Most all were fashioned with bells or sounding tubes to ring out on the hour. In the 18th century, English clockmakers such as Thomas Tomton or George Graham made significant advancements in clockmaking, leading to improved accuracy and reliability in grandfather clocks. These developments further solidified the clock's reputation as precision timepieces. By the way, next week, All Request History will rip open the history of duct tape, so make sure to come back next Monday. During the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution brought mass production techniques, making grandfather clocks more accessible to a broader range of people. Their popularity continued to grow, and they became a staple furnishing in homes, halls, and public buildings. The rise of technology also allowed clockmakers to get more creative. Fancier bells and tones were added, and most would chime at the quarter hour, the half hour, the hour, and often by one sound for each hour past 12. The cuckoo bird was a fun feature added during this time, and as much as kids thought differently, they were not real birds living behind those little doors inside the family clock. For the record, according to the wooden craft specialist Fred Felton, the difference between the two is this. If your timepiece is weight-driven, it's a grandfather clock. If it's spring-driven, it's a cuckoo clock. He also points out the obvious. If it chimes, grandfather. If it cuckoos, well, then yeah, it's a cuckoo clock. In the 20th century, grandfather clocks adapted to style changes to suit evolving tastes, with simpler designs and streamlined cases becoming more popular. Despite technological advancements in timekeeping, grandfather clocks have maintained their appeal as timeless pieces of craftsmanship and continue to be the cherished heirlooms in many houses around the world. In addition to their timekeeping function, grandfather clocks also served as status symbols and decorative focal points in homes, reflecting the owner's wealth, taste, and social standing. They were often prominently displayed in entryways, parlors, and other prominent areas of the home. Let's take a look at some of the most familiar grandfather clocks in today's world. If London's Big Ben comes to mind, you're probably not alone. However, it's not a grandfather clock. In order for it to qualify as a true grandfather clock, it needs to have weights and a pendulum. Big Ben is electric. So arguably, one of the most famous grandfather clocks would bring us to Season 4 of the Netflix series Stranger Things. When that grandfather clock strikes 4, Vecna is coming for the kill. On the complete other side of that thought, an honorable mention must be going to Cogsworth. That's the beloved character from Disney's Beauty and the Beast. The largest grandfather clock in the U.S. is in Milwaukee at the Anape Trailhead in Kenwanee. It's 35 feet 10 inches, fully functional, and chimes every quarter hour, loud enough to be heard throughout Kenwanee. The most expensive grandfather clock on record is the Duc d'Orléans Briquet Sympathique. It's a clock sold at Sotheby's auction in 1999 for $6.8 million. A weird fact about the grandfather clock, the use of Roman numerals. Most use the stylish numbers on their faces to make it look more elegant, but look carefully at the number 4. Sometimes you'll see an IV, and sometimes you'll see 4 I's. Which is correct? The answer is, of course, I followed by V. The reason some manufacturers use the incorrect likeness is debated, but some sources report the reason as basic economics. If builders use I's for the number 4, it keeps the symbols at an even number and easier to mass produce in batches. Now, if you think that cheapens the quality, apparently not. Look again at the $6.8 million Duc d'Orléans Briquet Sympathique. Another interesting theory is that the Roman supreme deity Jupiter's name in Latin was spelled I-V-P-P-I-T-E-R. So the IV on the clock where the 4 goes would be placed upside down, and that would be disrespectful or even bad luck. And lastly, according to Newgate Clock Company in London, the 4 I's are just simply more visually pleasing. Another fun fact, the nursery rhyme Hickory Dickory Dock is clearly about a grandfather clock.
Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse went up the clock struck 1, the mouse went down, Hickory Dickory Dock.
It's not really clear who wrote the rhyme. It was composed long before it showed up on Mother Goose books. But some sources say that the origins were from the use of animal fat to grease the clock gears, causing mice to run up the clock and nibble on the gears. Of course, if the gears moved or the clock made a noise, well, you know, when the clock strikes 1, down they run. Today, grandfather clocks remain popular among collectors and enthusiasts, with antique examples prized for their historical significance and craftsmanship. Modern versions continue to be produced, combining traditional design elements with contemporary materials and technology. Nowadays, you can program the chime to change the amount of times it gongs and even silence it if you're on a Zoom call from your home office, ensuring that the legacy of the grandfather clock endures well into the future.